Judiciars are those space marines who are training to become chaplains. Nearing the end of their path of training, they have taken a vow of silence as to not preach with words but preach with actions, the final steps to becoming a judiciar. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the judiciar, who is of course a chaplain in training, who has taken a vow of silence and decides to go after the greatest champions to prove his worth. So the Judiciar comes in at 70 points and has a fairly standard Space Marine profile for a character. He has 6 inches of movement, he's toughness 4, he has a 3+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, 4 wounds, leadership 5+, and OC 1. Very solid for the points, though nothing special. In terms of ranged weapons, he has his Absolver Bolt Pistol, which is 1 attack that hits on 3s at 18-inch range, strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2, so a not zero chance of sniping a Space Marine or any kind of infantry. He comes, of course, with his Executioner Relic Great Blade, which is precise and devastating wounds, has 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 7, AP 2, and damage 2. A general-purpose profile for most kinds of infantry, and is good enough to take down light and medium characters, though might struggle with tougher ones. In terms of abilities, he of course has his Temper Mortis, the relic that he holds in his left hand. While leading a unit, that unit has fights first. This is a super powerful buff that makes certain units pretty much unchargeable by even the mightiest of melee infantry. He has Silent Fury, so each time this model destroys an enemy character model, add 1 to the attacks characteristics of its relic blade. So if he destroys any characters, he gets an extra attack, which is a niche ability, but it is overall quite useful if it goes off. Against armies that use a lot of very lightweight characters, whether it be sisters or something similar, it could really go off and snowball really quite quickly into having quite a few extra attacks. Cycling back to his weapons, I wanted to just cover the Executioner Relic Great Blade a little bit better. The precision is of course useful for sniping out characters, but the devastating wounds is really useful to patch up its weakness against tough things, as while strength 7 is solid against infantry, it will struggle against most kinds of vehicles. However, the devastating wounds of course helps with not only that, but also bypassing the high saves of units like Terminators, and especially characters who often do have quite high saves. Overall, for 70 points, you get a rather solid mix of damage and buffs, though his buffs aren't quite as straightforward as something like a Space Marine Captain. As we're going to cover in a moment, I believe you have to really have a plan if you're going to use a Judiciar. Because in reality, he offers something that's not quite as simple as just free stratagems or +1 to wound from his senior chaplains or captains. He offers no direct damage buff to the unit aside from what he brings naturally, but what he does bring is sort of an indirect durability buff. For a unit like Inner Circle Companions or Blade Guard Veterans, if a unit charges them, let's say Khorne Berserkers, who could really put the smack down on these units, with fights first, they get to strike down, a large chunk of that unit and drastically reducing the damage of what they'd take in melee, which then allows them to also, means that in protracted combats that extend over over multiple turns, they will be extra effective because they will always fight first, and means they will win pretty much any combat they're in, unless it's against a Primarch level unit that even though they might damage, they will not destroy. In terms of units to buff, as mentioned, Blade Guard Veteran are quite solid, though I prefer the Inner Circle Companions for their greater damage. And, of course, that only applies if you play Dark Angels. As I mentioned earlier, his ability to get extra attacks is flavorful given the lore behind Judiciars, but it's also rather niche, as you need to be fighting the right kinds of characters and get into the combat with them. And in general, he is a little matchup dependent. Against an army like Tau, who has nothing that wants to be in melee, his buffs don't provide much outside of his own damage, which is respectable, especially against a lighter army like that. But against ranged armies, he won't do much, but against melee armies, he will be extremely valuable. So while he's not as straightforward as a captain or a chaplain, I think he does have a solid place in an army if you want to bring him, just to increase your charge defense. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.